It was a bright cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. George Orwell's dystopian classic 1984 begins as it intends to continue, with an unsettling ease. But this would be the book that killed him. The idea for the novel began in 1936 when he reported on the Spanish Civil War. Here he witnessed nightmarish atrocities and the propaganda of fascist political regimes. As dictators such as Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin came into power, they inspired Orwell's dislike for totalitarianism and political authority. He committed himself to writing politically charged novels. His first, Animal Farm, had been an enormous success. At the end of June 1944, a German V-1 rocket, known as a doodlebug, caused considerable damage to Orwell's flat. Wartime London cowered beneath an atmosphere stricken by random acts of terror, and this mood amongst the populace became integral for the setting of the new novel. However, Orwell's tumultuous final days had only just begun. In the final days of World War II, George Orwell continued to work in Europe on assignment for The Observer, but while away from home, he learnt that his wife Eileen had died during a routine operation. By May 1946, Orwell, still mourning the loss of his wife, in poor health and swamped by his journalistic duties, agreed to leave London. A friend offered him retreat at a remote Scottish farmhouse on the island of Jura. Here he could focus on his new book, at the time titled The Last Man in Europe. He'd found additional inspiration from Yevgeny Zamyatin's We, a dystopian novel in which a future society must conform to a ruling authoritarian body, and he read about the Tehran Conference of 1943, becoming convinced Stalin, Churchill and Roosevelt plotted to divide the world. Jura would be a torturous retreat, plagued by self-doubt and constant poor health. Living through one of the coldest winters of the century on a remote island off Scotland, he continued to suffer with a bad chest. Orwell continued to suffer from wretched health, but the island of Jura offered Orwell fresh air and the opportunity to explore with his son Richard, and the summer weather invited hikes up the coast. One day, Orwell, his sister, and Richard were returning in a small motorboat when the infamous Corryvreckan whirlpool almost dragged them beneath the waves. His son recalls the bloody cold and clambering over the rocks. Within 2 months, Orwell fell seriously ill with a constant cough and inflammation of the lungs. He ignored his poor health and continued working on the manuscript before receiving a diagnosis of TB, and in 1947, a cure for TB did not exist. Doctors prescribed an experimental drug, but it produced throat ulcers, hair loss, and the disintegration of his fingernails. By March 1948, however, Orwell's symptoms subsided. He said, "It's rather like sinking the ship to get rid of the rats, but worth it if it works." He had almost weathered the storm. As he prepared for discharge from hospital, Orwell's publisher wrote him a letter.
"It really is rather important, from the point of view of your literary career, to finish the novel by the end of the year, earlier if possible."
Instead of bed rest in warmer climates, Orwell returned to Jura's filthy autumnal weather. He became well practiced at editing in bed on his decrepit typewriter. It was a desperate race against time. He became too weak to walk, and the impending deadline loomed. Pots of coffee and a paraffin heater fought back the buffeting Barnhill gales, and by November 30th, 1948, the book was as good as complete. Orwell's health lay in tatters. A year later in his hospital room, he married Sonia Brownell, but his poor health teetered on the precipice and hobbled into the new year of 1950. In the small hours of January 21st, he suffered a hemorrhage and died alone. On receiving the manuscript for 1984, publisher Fred Warburg stated, "If we can't sell 15 to 20,000 copies, we ought to be shot." And with the book, Orwell created 5 neologisms and became one himself. 1. Room 101. Here is a room in which an occupant's worst fears become reality. Much like the 13th floor, hotels have often avoided having a room 101. 2. Doublethink. The action of accepting contrary opinions at the same time, especially as a result of political indoctrination. 3. Newspeak. Designed to limit the range of thought by diminishing vocabulary. These days it's used to denote jargon popular with those in power. 4. Thought police. An accusation leveled at a person or body who tries to tell us what we think is either right or wrong. Transgressing these rules with unorthodox thinking is known as thought crime. And 5. Big Brother. Refers to a government, ruler or person in authority who uses complete power to control people's behaviours, thoughts and freedom. I hope you've enjoyed our series on George Orwell's 1984, which ironically got banned on TikTok.